50th City Expats Club is a non-profit social organisation, and our speakers are volunteers. The club as such assumes no responsibility or liability for the professional reputation of or the quality of services provided by the speaker today.
To give a talk, talking on UFOs, that picture, cover up, and give them a huge round of applause, yeah?
Thank you, Ren, I think. I was telling Ren, I left my hotel down there by the Royal Palace Mall and hopped on a bot bus and came this direction. And I got to talking to somebody in the bot bus, and I thought, oh my goodness, I'm near the Holiday Inn, so I rang the bell, got off, and started to walk down towards Beach Street and realized I was 5 blocks away. So being as cheap as I am, I wasn't going to hop on a motorcycle, and so I walked. As you can see, the name of the book is UFOs, an overview of close encounters and low flybys. And I hope I don't screw this up, because normally when I give this presentation, I've got a laptop in front of me so I can scroll through the slideshow. So I'm going to give it a try here. This is actually my 5th book. I've written 4 books. I've had 4 books published previously. And the book, I guess everybody's sitting differently. The book on the end here, with the blue cover, Douglas Jumbo's Globemasters. This is just to let you know that I don't run around with a tinfoil hat on all day looking for flying saucers. So Douglas Jumbo's Globemasters, this is about the, kind of a short history about the Globemaster series of aircraft. Globemaster 1, the C-74, Globemaster 2, the C-124, and that's the airplane you saw on the cover, and that's the airplane I was a flight engineer on, the propeller-driven airplane. And the Globemaster 3, the C-17, and the reason I wrote this book, not only because I was a flight engineer, but because the C-17 was just entering operational service with the U.S. Air Force, and I thought the time was good for a book about the series. And then my second book, F-5 Tigers over Vietnam, this is a kind of a short developmental history of the Northrop F-5, its combat evaluation in Vietnam, and then its use by the Vietnamese Air Force. And I wrote this book because for a short time I was a technical advisor to the Vietnamese Air Force on their F-5 program. And in my 3rd book, Wiring Vietnam to the Electronic Wall, on my 2nd tour of duty here in Thailand during the Vietnam War, I was assigned to a fighter squadron whose primary responsibility was to air deliver a variety of electronic sensors in Laos, Cambodia, North and South Vietnam. And I came to the realization over the years that the system was misunderstood, so I decided to write a book about the various sensors development, their implementation, and their operational use during conflict. And my 4th book, Ice Meteors, The Danger Overhead. I've always been interested in what they call Fortean phenomena, or phenomena that science can't explain. And these large chunks of ice that fall out of a clear blue sky have always fascinated me. So I did some research and I wrote a book about it. And I think I turned the machine off. So that brings us to the book that the discussion is about today. And the cover photo is a false colored image of a photograph that I took near a marina where I live. And I think if you look at the O in UFOs, there's a kind of a black dot. I took this photograph and put it on a computer and enhanced it with this false color presentation, and the publisher thought it was a good enough picture to put on the cover. He sure didn't want to put my picture on the cover. So the reason for the book, I've been interested in the phenomenon for a long time, and I came to the realization that most UFO organizations, past and present, and also field investigators, don't really look at the phenomena in detail. Generally what we get is, for close encounters, is somebody saw an object land. It looked like a disc was sitting on some legs. Some creatures got out. They were odd looking, and it took off. there's no really specific detail in most of the, or no really analysis of the report in detail. So I went through the material I had, and I just for my own personal use, and decided that, gee, there was a lot of material here. There's something that maybe I can look at and might be a benefit to other people, so I wrote this book. One organization had attempted to do something like this. As you can see, the NICAP, the National Investigation Committee on Aerial Phenomena, they attempted to do this in a 1964 actually pamphlet called the UFO Evidence. But unfortunately, what they did was they attempted to track these things over the United States and various countries in the world, and they provided kind of a two-page spread of what these things look like, and they were just kind of hand drawings. So it wasn't too much of a use, but at least it was a start. So to bore you a little bit with my experience, I got about 45 years in aerospace, 4 years active Air Force, and 4 years reserve. And I retired after 30 years with Northrop Grumman. And some of my assignments included 3 years in Vietnam as a technical advisor working with the Vietnamese Air Force on their F-5 program. And then a year in Korea as a technical representative to the Korean Air Force F-5 program. 8 years in Saudi Arabia as a technical advisor to the Saudi F-5 program. And I was one of only 2 technical representatives on the F-18 program for Northrop. And I worked directly with a combined Navy and Marine squadron. I forgot what I wrote. I worked for a time in reliability, maintainability, and system safety as an engineering specialist. And then my last assignment with Northrop was on the F-18 ENF flight test program as a technical representative. I've had a lifelong interest in UFOs. I've got a big collection of UFO books, magazines, newspaper clippings, and things like that. So I'd like to tell you about 2 experiences I had. The first experience, I was a little nervous because of the big crowd. I was on a trip back across the pond. We were halfway between the Hawaiian Islands and the California mainland. And I was at the engineering station working on some calculations. I kept hearing the pilot co-pilot talk about this light in the sky. And the gist of the conversation was, it was at our altitude, it was very bright, it seemed to be pacing us. So eventually, curiosity got the best of me, and I unstrapped and leaned between the 2 idiots and looked out the windscreen, and sure enough, there's this really bright silver white light out about 11 o'clock, and it seemed to be at our altitude, and I talked about it to the pilots a little bit, sat back down. I didn't want the propellers to fall off the airplane. And a short time later, our navigator woke up, and we carried navigators back then. And he kind of yawned, ambled past me, and said to the pilots, "Where are we?" So we all got a kick out of that since he's the navigator. And they said, "Look out there," and he talked for a little bit, and then he said, "Just a second, let me go check my charts." So we went back to the station, came back and said, "It's Venus." And then it all made sense. You know, when we see Venus, we're standing on the ground, we're looking up, we see Venus, Mercury, some kind of star, and we've got some reference buildings, and we can see us apparently not moving. But we didn't have any of those cues. Looking out the windscreen, we had just a flat horizon, and you could tell the Earth was flat. The sun was still below the horizon, the sky was lighting up, the stars were gone, and Venus was at just the right elevation that it appeared that it was at our altitude. And it was out there at 11 o'clock, so it appeared that it was kind of pacing us. So it was quite an illusion, and unfortunately, a lot of UFO books and magazines and TV programs are loaded with this kind of light in the sky descriptions of UFOs. And of course, they're UFOs and people had seen them. And now I think this tends to dilute the real sightings that we'll be talking about today. Now, the second experience I'd like to talk about. When I was a lot younger, back before the invention of the airplane, I had a UFO experience, actual flying saucer experience. And I was standing out on the steps of my parents' house. It was a summer day, about 10:30 in the morning. And something caught my eye to the right, out to the west. And I brought some flying saucers to talk about. And coming across the sky was this gray, disc-shaped craft with a dome on the top. And I was kind of startled, and it flew in what we call like an undulating motion, kind of up and down motion. And then from the roof line of the house, a second one of these things appeared. The same color, same shape, same size. And it was doing the same thing. And what kind of fascinated me also was the fact that as this first disc went over, or did this little maneuver, it seemed like exactly at the same point in the sky the second disc did this. So they did this for about, maybe several cycles. And then the lead disc just flipped on its edge. And I can see that it was a complete circle, just like this dish. And there was a central circular part in the middle. And right after it did that, it flipped on its axis. And it traveled out to the west and was lost at sight. And then the trailing dish, at exactly the same point in the sky, did exactly the same thing. So that experience has kind of been with me all my life, and it's a reason that I've been fascinated with these things for so long. The book is, the material in the book is from what we call the modern era, 1940s to the 70s. And the reason I picked this particular time frame is of a couple of reasons. There's a lot of pretty good reports in this time frame, and also most of my materials from this time frame. And the book is divided into two sections. The first section is the witness reports. And what I did in the book is I've condensed them down to what I think we all know as the Reader's Digest version, so the shortened version. But every report in the book has a reference, so you know where the report came from. And then there's what I call the technical section, or an evaluation section, where I look at the reports and say, what can we learn from them? The first example that I'm going to show you, I picked just this one example. I've got one example for every chapter. And the first chapter, as you can see, is conversations with occupants. And I picked this particular observation for two reasons. First of all, the witness was a policeman. And as you know, policemen, they have reputations to uphold within their communities, and they're good observers. And also, I got to thinking, you know, policemen from time to time are required to provide testimony in a criminal trial. So I can imagine, in this case, maybe this particular policeman being called to the stand and having the defense attorney say, aren't you the guy that saw the flying saucer and the little green men inside? And you can imagine what impact that would have on a jury. So anyway, this patrolman, Herbert Schimmer, he's outside of Ashland, Nebraska. It's December of 1967. It's 2:30 in the morning. Routine patrol. He's on a country road, unlit. He comes to a bend in the road, and he looks and he sees that there's something going on around the bend, because the bend seems to be lit up, you know. So he makes the bend, and he's a bit startled. There's something on the road. It's real bright. There's a flash, and it lifts off into the sky and it disappears. So he's startled. He looks around. Nothing's amiss. So he continues his patrol. He gets back to the police station, writes his end of shift report, and he ends it with saw flying saucer, believe it or not. Over a short period of time, he has what he describes as a welt develops on the back of his neck, and it's bothering him. He starts to have these strange dreams, and a UFO organization gets contacted, and they send a team down and they start interviewing him. And they go through his logs, and they realize that 20 minutes of his time is missing. So he's a bit concerned about this, and he agrees to be put under hypnosis. And the hypnotist this organization uses is a licensed hypnotist, but he also has a PhD in psychology. So they regress him back to the particular evening. So we're back at 2:30 in the morning. We're on this country road. He comes to the bend in the road, and he sees something going on. He makes the bend, and he initially sees what he thinks is an overturned truck. There are lights on, and there are a couple people. And as he comes to a stop, he looks and he realizes he's seeing something that looks like this. Now, this is what the policeman had drawn. I added the detail of the ladder or the stairs, because I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. And one thing about this, it looks pretty simplistic, but through my review of all of the material that I had and stuff on the internet, I come to the realization that those reports people have witnessed of vehicles on the ground and aliens either in them or out of them look like this. They don't look like the stylized versions that are on the internet. So anyway, he's taking this all in, and he could see that near one of these landing struts, there what he thinks are two people doing something. And then down this ladder comes two more of these people. And he can see that they've got something in their hand. It's one of their hands. It's kind of shiny. Looks like a box. And as they reach the ground, one of them raises his arm and points this device at the patrol car. And a green light or green beam emerges out of it, and it covers the patrol car. And he's kind of stunned at this. Everything's turning green. He's green. He looks like that, maybe. So anyway, the light goes out, and the next thing he sees is through his open window, there's an arm reaching in, and the hand's got this shiny small box in it, and it touches the back of his neck. And there's a slight pinch, and the arm is withdrawn. And later on, he thinks, this is where this weld comes from that people have seen. And he also thinks later on that maybe what they did was to calm him during this encounter. So he gets out of the car, and standing near him or next to him is this guy. And the patrolman says he's about 4.5, 5 feet tall. He's got on this tight-fitting silver gray outfit. He's muscular built. You can see muscular or muscles bulging from underneath the suit. He's got on black boots, black belt, and black gloves. And on his left chest, the patrolman says, is a patch in the shape of a seal. And on this patch is, the patrolman says, the image of a winged serpent, so a flying snake. Covered up where the left ear should be is something, and there's an antenna sticking out of it, so he assumes it's some kind of communications device. The being's face is kind of a grayish-white. It's kind of a long horse face, not too handsome like me. He's got thin lips, long nose, like me again. And the eyes are what really fascinates him, because he says the eyes are like a cat. And we have round eyes, round irises around pupils, and this guy's eyes were vertical slits, just like a cat's eyes. So he gets out of the patrol car, and this being says, "Are you the watchman over this place?" He says, "Yes, sir." And there's a little bit of banter about nearby objects, and then the being says, "Come with me, watchman." So they start off towards this landing craft. And as he nears it, you can see that there are two more of these guys underneath the craft, near the landing gear. They're working on something. And they're the same size, and they're dressed the same way. And standing near the ladder is another guy, a third guy, and the patrolman seems to think this guy is security. And he says, just by the way he looks and his mannerisms and how he stares at the patrolman. So the being he's with, now the patrolman thinks this guy's the leader. The leader goes up the stairs, and the patrolman starts up, and he notices that the ladder, the steps are built in the back of the door. And on either side there are handrails, and these seem to be collapsible. So I got to thinking that apparently when the doors close, the handrails and everything are stowed and out of the way within the craft. So he goes up into the craft, squeezes through the little opening, and he comes into a room that looks like this. And he says the walls are covered, what he says are instrument panels, all kinds of dials and lights on them. In front of each instrument panel, and apparently fixed to the floor, are small chairs with a V type of back. At two of these stations, there are two more of these guys who are busy working, apparently the flight engineers. And he looks on the floor, and in the middle of the floor, right in the center there, he says there are a series of 12 canisters arranged in a circle. And these canisters are connected with a set of what he says are parallel running wires, and they terminate in the middle of the circle in a low, glowing, cone-shaped object. So the leader comes over, and he's staring at the stuff, and he says, "This is our repulsion mechanism. The rest is under the floor, and it works by a reverse electromagnetism," whatever that means. So the being motions him to go up to the second level there, where you see there's a window and two chairs and a couple of instrument panels. And the being points down to one of the instrument panels and an instrument on the panel, and he points to it. And the patrolman looks, and he's not too sure what he's looking at, because he doesn't understand what the instrument is or what it's saying, but he sees that apparently it's reading either empty or near empty. And then the leader points out at the window, and from the side of the craft, the patrolman sees his arm extend 90 degrees, and then it telescopes out to a nearby power line. There's a little spark, and then beam points down to this instrument. You can see this, apparently, what's ever happening, this instrument started to go to what he thinks is full. And the leader says, this is how we extract power from the craft. And then the patrolman looks back down, and the instrument's going back down. He looks out the window, and this boom is retracting, and it folds back into the craft, and it's stowed. So about this time, there's some commotion in the craft. He turns to look, and there's more of these guys in the craft, and he assumes that the three that were outside are now in the craft. So the leader says it's time to go. He's escorted back to the patrol car, and the leader says, you won't remember any of this. And the next thing the patrolman sees, he's on the road, there's something in the roadway, there's a bright flash, the thing takes off and disappears into the night sky. And so that's some story he told. So a couple of things about this, and it gets into the analysis I wish that UFO organizations and investigators would do is specifically what did this instrument look like? It would have been interesting. You know, back then, the commercial airplanes and military airplanes have what we call steam gauges, you know, the round analog type of gauges, work off a differential pressure and things like that. So it would have been interesting to find out if the patrolman would have described these instruments as like TV screens, small TV screens. And the reason I say that is, you know, glass cockpits in airplanes are now 15 or 20 years into the future, so it would have been interesting if you described it that way, and in our current environment, an investigator could look back and say, you know what, this guy was in this craft, and he was actually describing a glass cockpit inside the craft. Additionally, it would have been interesting to find out what the craft actually looked like. As he was approaching it, it would have been interesting for the team to ask him, could you tell what they were doing under the craft? What did the landing gear look like? The craft itself, did you see any seams or anything that looked like an access panel? The handrails on the side of the ladder, what did it look like? Did you see any fasteners, any way it was connected? And questions like this would give us a good idea of their manufacturing technology. So again, it's unfortunate that this didn't take place. And one thing that's always fascinated me too about this encounter, they didn't take away his gun. And that kind of surprised me because I think if I was the leader, I'd be thinking, you know what, the last thing we're going to need is this guy getting inside our airplane and have him take the gun out and start shooting things up, and we're stuck here forever. And that brings another point about these encounters. There have been a lot of encounters where people have been inside these things or have been with these beings, and the beings have taken things from them, wallets, watches, and things like that, but always returned them. They've never kept anything. So they must pay attention to the thou shalt not steal commandment. The second chapter, the attempted conversations with occupants, and I picked these two. I'm going to go through them real fast. The first one because it's simply because when I read it quite some time ago, it was amusing to me. It was kind of like cartoonish. And the story goes that a witness comes upon a landed disc. There are three beings outside, and one of these humanoid-looking beings comes up to him, and he starts apparently talking to him, but all the witness hears is a bunch of noise coming out of his mouth. So the witness says, I think he just got frustrated. He turned around, walked back to the craft. They all got in, and it took off into the sky. And like I said, when I read this, I read it several times a long time ago, and I just pictured this as a cartoon. But the second one was a bit more interesting. Circumstances are the same. Humanoid-looking being comes up to the witness, and he starts talking, and what the witness says is German, or what sounds like German. The witness, although his native language is English, he can speak and understand German. And he said, sounded like German, but he said nothing made any sense. There was no actual sentence. It just seemed like a jumble of German words. And so Again, the being realized that he wasn't, there was a failure to communicate. So he turned around, walked back to the craft took off, flew up into the sky. And I got to thinking about this, you know, in our modern technology, our iPhones, not only can we translate English into German, Dutch, French, whatever, and vice versa, but there's also an app on our phones that we can actually talk into the phone in English, or German or French, but in English and have it translated into another language. The phone will actually speak in your sentence or your phrase in whatever language you choose. So then, you know, French, German, English. There's also an app I just found out that can translate Australian into English. That's pretty interesting. It's not funny? I hope there are not too many Australians here.
There are a lot of people.
Oh.
They're not laughing.
So we covered this already. Chapter 3 is occupants observed at close range and no communication. And I chose this one here. It's the Socorro, New Mexico landing in April 1964. I chose it for two reasons. The first one is we have another patrolman. And the second one is I worked at White Sands on a project for a while, and I'm familiar with the area, so it kind of fascinated me. So the story is Officer Lonnie Zamora is on the outskirts of Socorro, New Mexico, chasing a speeder on a highway. And he hears this roaring sound. He looks out the windshield, and up in the sky he sees this cone-shaped blue flame, kind of reddish tinge, descending out of the sky, and it disappears behind a nearby hill on the side of the road. So he's a bit concerned. He says he thinks that the dynamite shack on the other side, he knows it's on the other side of the hill, blew up. So he breaks off the chase, slows the patrol car down, and he starts up this road, starts driving up this little hill. He gets to the top, starts driving on the top where he thinks this flame disappeared from, and he looks down and he sees what he initially thinks is an overturned car with he says, two kids near it, and they're dressed in white. So he travels a little further to try to get a better view of what's going on down there, and he finally stops the car and he's kind of looking down and at an angle to this car, and he realizes it's not a car, it's actually a disc-shaped or oval-shaped object. There's a red letter on the side of the craft. He can see two legs and these two kids dressed in white. He can't see any detail for his facial features. So he's a little concerned. He gets out of the patrol car and starts to walk a little bit towards the edge of the hill, and he slams the patrol car door. As soon as he does this, he says that these two kids, or whatever they are, turn and look in his direction just immediately, and they appear to be stunned, and then he says they run to the back of the craft, and they're lost to his sight because of the angle. And he says the next thing he hears is what it sounds like a car door closing. And then immediately this roaring sound starts again. And from the bottom of the craft, this blue flame develops. So he gets stunned and scared, and he turns, starts to run back to the car, and he falls down. He's picking himself up, and he realizes, I don't hear that sound anymore. And he stands up, turns, and looks, and suspended in the sky about eye level is this disc-shaped craft. And it's got this strange red lettering on the side. There's no sound, there's no flame. It's just stuck in the sky, and he says, then it starts to accelerate away from him, and it is lost to sight. It just barely clears some nearby trees and buildings, and it's lost his sight. So he's a bit shaken. He goes back to the patrol car and radios his dispatcher, asks for assistance. And pretty much immediately, a Sergeant Chavez from the New Mexico State Police, the Highway Patrol, shows up. And he tells him the story, and Chavez doesn't really believe him, but they go down to the landing site, and sure enough, there are 4 rectangular marks in the ground. In the center of these marks, there's some burned areas, and there appears to be small footprints. So Chavez radios back to his dispatcher, and he asks the dispatcher to check with the airports, military bases, anybody think of, see if they had any aircraft or test vehicles out in the area. And the report comes back, no, nobody knows anything about anything going on in your area. So he requests the local base send a team out. And the local base is Kirkland Air Force Base. and they send a team out, and so officers are more on the side here with the gun sticking out of his holster. 2 officers conducting an investigation. They've got they're checking for radiation, and as you can see, the enlisted guys doing the work. So anyway, the team decides they don't know what in the heck he saw. Nobody had anything in the area, and the Air Force labels it as an unknown craft. It's an unknown craft operating in the area. Now, a UFO organization gets wind of this, and they send a team down. And the team does a pretty good analysis of the observation. This is a photo of, you can't see it very well, it's one of the landing pads. It's rectangular in shape. And the policemen actually put some rocks around it to prevent people from walking all over it. They did this at each 4 locations. The team performs a penetrometer measurements of the ground within the landing marks and then the ground outside of the landing marks. And they come to the conclusion that the craft must have weighed at least 4 tons. And then they notice that the landing marks or the landing pads are irregular. The first thing they notice is that the outer edge of the pad marks, the ground has been pushed out and up. So it appears that when this thing landed and its weight compressed onto the gear, the tripod or the 4 landing gears, the weight actually pushed these pads outward. And then the next thing they noticed is the pads aren't equally spaced. So they did some calculations and they came to the conclusion that the landing gear on the craft actually had it was self-leveling. So that as the craft settled down on the uneven terrain, the gear compensated for it, kept the craft level. And they also, as you can see, the B markings are the burn marks they've witnessed, and then there were some small footprints around one of the landing gear. And so they also come to the conclusion that the patrolman saw some type of unknown craft. They also checked with the military, and there was no way that anything we had at the time could perform the feat that this craft did, raised up into the air. It couldn't hear anything. It was completely silent. It appeared to be motionless for a time, and then it took off. And in Chapter 4, the craft observed no occupants. This took place over Cleveland in October of '73. And I chose this because of something that affected the instrument in the helicopter. So the helicopter at the time, there was a helicopter crew was coming back from a routine training mission. They were a reserve crew. They were over Cleveland, and one of the crew members in the cabin reported a red light approaching the helicopter, and the pilot in the helicopter sits on the right-hand side of the airplane, looks out, sees this light out in the distance, appears to be coming close to us. He tries to contact air traffic control. He can't get air traffic control. He can't raise anybody. So he decides that this thing's getting near, and first he thinks it's an Air Reserve F-100 fighter. He decides to put the helicopter in a slight dive just to make sure they don't have a mid-air collision. So he's got the controls in a slight dive, and this thing accelerates and it stops right above and in front of the craft. And they're looking at something that looks like this. This is what the pilot drew. So there's this big red light in the front. At the back of the craft is a big red green beam. Pilot still has the controls in the descent. They look, everybody sees this thing, and the beam then swings and it illuminates the helicopter. Everything turns green in the helicopter. Everybody's a bit stunned. The pilot looks at his instruments, and now he sees that although he's got the controls in the descent, the helicopter's going up. It's slowly going up, and he's a bit concerned about this. He keeps the controls as they were in the descent. And then the green beam swings back to where it was, and the thing shoots off into the sky and disappears. The helicopter continues up for a little bit. Here's a little click and a shudder, and he regains control of the helicopter, and he notices that initially he was at 2,500 feet, now he's at 3,600 feet. So the helicopter responds to his controls, and he goes back down to his cruising altitude. And eventually he raises the base, and gets permission to land. But on the way back, he notices that his standby compass is slowly rotating. So he lands at the base, shuts the helicopter down, the standby compass continues to rotate. So they all go in and write up an incident report. He writes up the standby compass. The next day, maintenance goes out to do a post-flight check, and they look at the compass, and sure enough, it's still rotating. So they remove the compass, replace it. The replacement compass works okay. This is a photo of what the compass looked like. And these compasses are standard in any military airplane. So they all look the same, they all operate the same. They work just like a Boy Scout compass. There's nothing sophisticated about them. And the pilot standby compass, I've got it circled in red on the right-hand side over there, just so you know where it's located. There are two in the airplane. The pilot and co-pilot have standby compasses. The co-pilot is located on the other side of the instrument panel, same location. The standby compass, again, it's very simple. It's got an aluminum case. It's filled with a liquid to slow down the rotation of the compass wheel so it doesn't have these erratic movements as the airplane moves around. Brass or aluminum screws, nothing ferrous except the compass wheel, and the compass wheel has two magnets on it. So the mystery is what caused the compass to rotate slowly either during or slightly after the encounter. And the unfortunate part about this is the compass is a non-repairable item, so it's very reliable. The 45 years I've been associated with military airplanes, I've never seen one go bad. And as such, there's no repair procedures because the military doesn't want to invest in the technical orders and the train people and have the equipment to repair something that never breaks. But they all have serial numbers. And it's unfortunate that a UFO organization at the time, or the UFO investigator that investigated this, didn't follow this up. Could have gone and gotten a serial number for maintenance, gone to supply and said, what happened to this? Did he? Certainly it went through an investigation because it was involved in a near mid-air collision. So unfortunately we don't know anything about the compass or what happened to it. And this is another thing that got frustrated with UFO investigators and organizations is there's no real follow-up on any of this stuff. You know, it's really experience, and that was it. So we've covered the questions about the encounter, and then chapter 5, Falcon Lake, and it's the last chapter in this section. It's the effects on terrestrial objects and people, and I chose this one because the person that had the encounter actually was hurt by the encounter. So this one takes place, as you can see, in May of 1967 near Falcon Lake, Canada. It's a prospector. He's out in the woods prospecting, looking for bottle tops, wood nickels, things like that. And as he's walking along, he sees overflying him two disc-shaped objects. They're shiny. And the lead disc, he sees dips down and is followed down by the second disc, and the lead disc kind of disappears into the tree line out there, and the trailing disc picks back up, goes back to whatever altitude it was cruising at, and continues on. So the prospector is a bit curious about this, and he starts to walk into the direction where this thing disappeared. It's a wooded area. Finally comes to a clearing, and he sees in the wooded area, again, this is his drawing, something that looks like this, about 30 to 40 feet in diameter. And it's very shiny. It looks like he says it looks like it's made out of stainless steel and appears to be hot. Sees heat waves coming off it. So he stays behind the tree line for a while because he thinks this might be some kind of secret American airplane or something associated with the Canadian government. But nothing happens. So he decides, curiosity gets the better of him. He starts walking towards this thing, and he sees that on the raised part up there, on the dome part, there are what look like elongated portholes. And from this, this intense purple light is coming. And on the lower part, there's a graded area. And next to it is an open door. And inside is this intense purple light. He gets near the, next to the craft, he's got on rubber gloves, prospecting gloves. He puts his hand on the side of the craft to kind of bend down and look inside, inside this thing, and he notices that his rubber gloves start to melt. So apparently this thing is very hot. So he bends down and he looks inside. He can't see anything because of this intense purple light. And he yells into the doorway in a couple of languages. I guess anybody home. Because he can hear what he says sounds like something like an electric motor running, and he thinks somebody's in there talking. He's not too sure of the sounds, but he thinks somebody's talking. So he yells, what anybody home? And as soon as he does this door closes, the craft starts to rock, and from this grated area, this huge blast of hot air catches him right in the chest, knocks him over. He's scared. He can see this thing lift off the ground. It raises into the air and it takes off. So he starts crawling away, and he feels nauseated, headaches, sick to his stomach. Eventually gets to his feet, walks to the nearby road, is picked up, brought to a hospital. And tells the people in the ER room what happened to him. His shirt, they see his shirt is burnt. They cut his shirt away. On his chest, this is a photo taken in the hospital, are these burn marks. And the burn marks, he says, oh, that's strange. They are in the same pattern as on this craft. So the doctors initially think he's suffering from radiation sickness, but they do some tests and figure that no, that's not the case. Eventually he feels better, and he's released. With this encounter, the U.S. Air Force in the mid-60s funded the University of Colorado to conduct a study of UFOs, and this is the one that they investigated, and they came to the conclusion that yeah, something happened to them, we don't know what, so we can't comment on it. So we talked about this. I think maybe the craft landed because it was in trouble. And in chapter 6 are the technical evaluations, and as you can see, they're broken down into evaluation of landing gear system, flight characteristics, sounds associated with the craft, anomalous events, magnetic anomalies, things of that nature. And just as an example, the landing gear system, because being an airplane guy, I'm fascinated with that. Through my review of all of the reports, I noticed that these things have a landing gear that basically consists, or more often than not, consists of a tripod gear. And the tripod gear comes down in two ways. The first way, it's lowered as a complete assembly, locks into place, and the craft settles down. And then there's another way. The other way is a portion of it comes down from the craft, and the remainder telescopes at it. The craft settles down. The design of the craft, or the landing gear, are two different types. The one is tubular, and the other is square. But one thing I noticed during my look at this area was that these things come out of the sky at a relatively high speed, but they've got to slow down to almost a hover or a stop before the landing gear is extended. And then when they depart, same thing. It raise off the ground a bit, landing gear is retracted, and they take off at high speed. So I wondered about this, because as you know, airplanes with retractable landing gear, they have what's called a gear retraction speed, where the landing gear can't be extended out into the airstream above a certain airspeed because it might be damaged. So gear doors might come off, wires to switches might be ripped off. So on takeoff, before the airplane reaches the speed, the gear is put up. And on landing, after the airspeed is reduced below this speed, the gear is extended. And I got to thinking maybe the reason that these craft need to slow down to extend and be slow retracting your gear is because whatever mechanism is either propelling the craft or protecting it during high-speed maneuvers does not extend far enough below the craft to encompass the landing gear. And in the flight characteristics, one of the things I mentioned in the book, there's more of this in detail in the book, but This motion that I described, the two craft that I had seen, this undulating motion, in UFO literature, people seem to think maybe this is related to magnetic anomalies or gravitational anomalies, where the craft is compensating for these anomalies. And I had come to the conclusion I don't think that's true, because they're not the craft that I had seen, and those described there. What I had seen was too well timed and too well spaced to be associated with any anomalies like that. And so I think, and I talk about this in the book, I think maybe what we're seeing is, at least in cruise flight, whatever propulsion mechanism they have is being pulsed. And sounds associated with the craft, this is kind of typical sounds of motors and things like that. And then the anomalies, the vehicle stoppages, have always fascinated me, because I've always read about cars and airplanes having their motors affected by close encounters of these craft, and either running rough or having them completely stop. And I came to the realization that this only happens with cars and airplanes that are piston powered. Jet-powered airplanes they've not been affected by close encounters. As an example, this helicopter. Helicopter had a jet engine. Jet engine worked fine. There was, I think in the late 80s, on most of the news channels, Japan Airlines 747 over Alaska had an encounter with this huge disc-shaped craft that went around the craft and went through several motions near the craft, and all four engines of the 747 operated normally. So I got to thinking about this. Why are piston-powered airplanes affected in cars and jet engines aren't? And the reason is piston-powered airplanes and cars work the same way. So a car has a coil, distributor, spark plugs, spark plug wires, spark plug. And a piston-powered airplane has a magneto, same thing. Spark plug wires and spark plugs. And really, at higher RPMs, spark plugs work continuously, although they're timed. But if you look at a spark plug, that's in operation. It looks like it's working continuously. But jet engines aren't like that. Jet engines have one igniter, one big spark plug. Some have two, but most have one. And the igniter or the spark plug on a jet engine works only at start. So a pilot gets in an airplane, like a fighter, and turns on all his switches and advances the throttle to idle. There's an external source of air that's turning the turbine over. And when the engine reaches a certain RPM, this spark plug, or the igniter, starts to fire. And it continues to fire for 15 seconds about. The engine builds up speed and it's at idle. And after 15 seconds, the engine igniter, the spark plug, stops. It's no longer used during the entire flight. So apparently, whatever has caused or is causing airplane engines and car engines to have a problem near these things is affecting their ignition system. And then the aliens, what did they look like? And they come in a variety of shapes and sizes. As I said in the Ashland, Nebraska case, small guy looked like us except for his eyes. Other cases, they were weird looking. As a matter of fact, I think the American Indians had a history of talking about the insect people that would come from the sky and talk to them. But one of the encounters that kind of fascinated me, a witness was having a discussion with a humanoid-looking being from one of these craft, and he asked him, "Where do you come from?" And the being said, "We come from a league of planets." And this word "league" kind of fascinated me, because it didn't seem like something somebody that was making a story up would use. You know, you'd think that this guy, if he was making a story, would say, "Yeah, the being said he came from the Federation of Planets, a Union of Planets," something like that. But a league to me seemed unusual. So I looked it up in a dictionary. Yeah, I've got a Webster, so I don't use the internet at my age to try to find anything. And there are a bunch of definitions and uses for the term league, but there's one that caught my eye, and I thought, gee whiz, maybe this being knew exactly the word that he wanted to describe to the witness. So he said, come from this League of Planets, and I got to thinking about that, and it kind of made sense because we see all these different beings coming to visit us, and obviously they come from different worlds. So there must be a central scientific organization that maybe receives papers from these different worlds that say, we want to go visit the Earth because. And then this scientific organization says, okay, you guys from Planet X, it's your turn to go visit the Earth. And then this makes sense in another way because, you know, we go through these times where we have these vast amount of sightings. As an example, in 1954, there were a vast amount of sightings around the world, especially in France. And in one instance in France that I read about, this craft landed, looked just like this Ashland, Nebraska craft, and beings got out, and the witnesses said that they were picking up soil samples and samples of plants and things like that. And they got back in the craft and took off. And in this one particular encounter, one of the French UFO organizations went and investigated the landing, and they took penetrometer measurements and determined that the craft weighed 30 tons. And in another case in France, one of these things landed in a lavender field, and the witness went to talk to these guys, and he said that the discussion was about fertilizer. And, you know, what kind of fertilizer, what is it? And this being said that we have trouble growing things on our planet, and we're amazed at how rich the Earth is in this type of stuff. So we get back to the League of Planets and the fact that maybe we're being visited on occasion by a variety of different beings. We talked about the landing gear, the characteristics. I guess I got ahead of myself. The sounds, the anomalous events, and the craft themselves. I talked about the landed craft, and they all look like two silk bolts stuck together. Not the, like I said, not the stylized versions that we see on the internet. And talking about the crafts themselves, this is a photo taken in 1954 by a pilot in France. It's you can't see too much detail because it's an enlargement of the photo, but one thing that, as far as the craft themselves is concerned, this particular model, if you look on the edges, there's this flat area. And it kind of fascinated me because the flat area is not useful space. I mean, it looks like you can't walk around inside that. So apparently this flat area has something to do with the propulsion mechanism. We talked about what they look like. And there's a chapter about interplanetary and interstellar travel that I included. I talk about the problems with exceeding the speed of light, wormholes, things like that. How can these beings get to our planet from some far off distant star? You know, the closest star is about 4 light years away. And traveling with rocket power, you know, it'd take us centuries to get there. Traveling at the speed of light, take us 4 years to get there, 4 years to get back. So I was a little mystified about this. And then just recently, I got to reading on the internet about a new theory of gravity. And this theory's been around actually for a while. It goes back to the 1700s, or the mystery goes back to the late 1700s, where scientists in Europe were a bit concerned that it took 8 minutes for light to reach from the sun to the Earth. But it appeared that the force of gravity is instantaneous. So they couldn't understand that how could gravity exceed the speed of light. That was kind of the question. But this new theory is based on what's called gravitons. And gravitons, according to the theory, which has been peer-reviewed, can travel at least 10 times the factor of light. So this kind of puts this whole, if this theory is proven to be true, and like I said, it's been peer-reviewed, so scientists have looked at it and said, yeah, this thing makes sense. If we put this together with this League of Planets and beings visiting us, it all kind of makes sense now. You know, the speed of light can be exceeded. A being from the nearby star, Proxima Centauri, could take days to reach us. So it kind of makes sense now. There's a section with photo pages, and the photos in the book are only film photos. There are no digital photos except for mine. And there's a reason for that. And the film photos, the reason I included only film photos is because they can be analyzed a lot better than digitalized photos. Because nowadays you can make anything look real on a computer, put it on the internet. So they're all film photos. They've all been analyzed. They've all been documented to be unknown. And the one I used for this presentation is pretty famous. There are two photos. They were taken in McMinnville, Oregon in 1950. And the story goes that the farmer's wife were outside the farmhouse there. And the wife says, there's something strange coming across the sky. And the farmer looks, he runs into the house, gets his camera. Back then, cameras were pretty simple. You took a picture and you rolled to the next stop. So anyway, he took these two pictures, and I'm showing these two just to show what the scene looked like. And these are the blow-ups of the two photos. So as you can see, it has this little flange-shaped area on the outer edges. There's what looked like a conning tower, and the other shot shows some of the other sides kind of dark. But the photos have been analyzed to death. The U.S. Air Force analyzed the photos, and they came to the conclusion this is an unknown object. Various UFO organizations have analyzed the photos. It's an unknown object. One of the most famous photo interpreters, Dr. Bruce McCabe, analyzed the photo. It's an unknown object. And even the scientific study on UFOs that was commissioned by the Air Force that tried its best to debunk all these stories, analyzed these photos and said, it's a photo of an unknown object, several tens of meters in diameter, quite a distance from the camera. So even though the conclusion of their report was that there's nothing to this flying saucer business, this is a flying saucer. And then there's an illustration page, and there's illustrations of the craft and the landing marks and things like that. And I've got an appendix, or two appendices. The first appendix, I'm not too sure if you're familiar with the story of the crashed Roswell disc. Okay. So I don't want to tell the story unless people want to hear it. So if you want to hear it, raise your hand. Okay, thanks a lot. My mouth is dry enough. So I'll tell the story. In July of 1947, rancher Max Brazil is out in a farmhouse outside of Roswell, New Mexico. He's the kind of the guy taking charge of the house, or the ranch. And this thunderstorm rolls through the area. In New Mexico, they have these famous thunderstorms, thunder and lightning and rain and hail. And anyway, during the night he hears this unusual thunderclap, but he doesn't pay any attention to it. The next morning, the thunderstorm has rolled through the area. He goes out, hops on his horse, and goes and checks the ranch for damage. And after he's riding a while, he comes to this, what he calls it, this big debris field. And the ground is littered with all kinds of material. So he gets off his horse and he walks through this debris field. He picks up this, what looks to him like a foil. And this piece of foil has got this kind of curve to it. And he looks at it, and it's not a crease or a seam in it. And he crunches it in his hand, opens it up, springs back to where it was, and there's not a wrinkle or crease in it. Does this a couple times, kind of amazes him. So he looks around, and there are some pieces of metal, and there are these pieces of what he thinks are wood because they're kind of tan colored. And he picks it up, looks at it, and he tries to light it on fire, and nothing happens. It doesn't burn, it doesn't scorch. Apparently, the flame has no impact on it. So he picks up some of these pieces, puts them in a saddlebag, hops on his horse, completes his rounds, doesn't find anything else, and he goes to his neighbors. He shows his neighbors these things, and they're amazed too. And later on in the 80s, when some of the UFO investigators, they interviewed these people, and they said, yeah, I remember when Matt brought this stuff around. It's really amazing. So one of them recommends he goes into town and shows this stuff to the sheriff because apparently something happened out there. So he goes to town, talks to the sheriff. The sheriff says, yeah, something unusual. He calls the base, and he talks to the base public information officer, and he passes the information on to the base commander, Colonel Blanchard, and Blanchard notifies his chief of security, who is Major Jesse Marcel, and he explains what's going on. And Major Marcel is a combat-rated pilot, many hours in a year, a lot of hours in B-29s, flew missions in Japan, is the intelligence officer of the only base in the world with a bomber wing capable of carrying the atomic bomb. So it's a highly classified base. Everybody there has been vetted. So Marcel grabs a lieutenant, and there's another civilian. They go out to Mac's place. It's kind of late in the day. So they, am I telling the story right? Okay. So they spend the night at Mac's place, and the next morning they all hop in the vehicle that they brought from the base, and they drive out. They reach this area, and sure enough, Marcel sees this wide area of stuff. And he's just as amazed. He doesn't know what it is. So he collects a bunch of it, puts it in a box, puts it in a truck. They all go back to Mac's place. They drop Mac off. And when they get back to the base, it's late. So he decides that he's going to bring this stuff home. Next day, he'll show the base commander. So he brings it home, shows his wife and kid. And his son looks at this stuff and plays with it. And later on, his son becomes an officer in the Army Reserve, and he flies helicopters. And he's interviewed later on, by these UFO investigators. He said, yeah, I remember when my dad brought this stuff home. It's really strange. And he said, as a matter of fact, there was one piece that looked like an angle iron. It's real light, light like aluminum. And embossed into this angle iron were things that looked like Egyptian hieroglyphics, and they were colored purple. So anyway, the next day, Major Marcel brings the stuff to the base commander, and Colonel Blanchard looks, and apparently something happened out there. So he schedules a reconnaissance airplane to go out in the area, see what's going on. Maybe something crashed out there. So the reconnaissance airplane is on its way, and eventually it radios back. There's a dish-shaped craft on the ground down here. It looked like it crashed. So Blanchard sends a team out, and sure enough, there's this dish-shaped craft about 30 feet in diameter. The side of it's been torn open. They can look inside, and there's all kinds of lights going on, so apparently it's still running. And so the story goes, there are these 4 alien beings, 3 of which are dead, 1 still alive. They radio back to Blanchard. So Blanchard contacts the local press radio, and he says, we found a flying saucer. So of course the local press, this is the next day, Roswell Daily Record, we got a flying saucer, and the news station broadcasts the same thing, and it starts to pick up across the United States. We captured a flying saucer. Well, General Ramey, who was the head of the Air Division down in Fort Worth, Texas, gets wind of this, and steam comes out his ears. He contacts Blanchard, and he says, you can go down and you tell those people at the radio station to stop transmitting, or else we're going to take your license away. And this is what the disc jockey at the radio station said. And you tell the people to print out a retraction. And you tell that Jesse Marcel to get his rear end down here. So Marcel hops on an airplane. He goes down to Fort Worth. He goes into, he's escorted into a room that's loaded with newspaper people, photographers. And in the room is General Ramey. And on the floor is this tinfoil material, some balsa wood, some string. And Ramey says, guess what? He misidentified this stuff as a flying saucer. So the press, they believe him. They say, oh, okay, gee whiz. I guess it wasn't a flying saucer. And then the story comes out. General Ramey says this wasn't a flying saucer. It's actually a weather balloon. So the reason for the appendix. I got to thinking about this story because all of the UFO experts say that this crashed disc was taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. And I got to thinking, how could they do this logistically? Because it fascinated me. What were the logistics involved in this? So I decided 3 methods: airplane, train, or truck. So I immediately discounted the airplane. There's no way that the biggest airplane we had at the time was the Globemaster 1, the C-74. It couldn't have carried this thing. So train and truck. I discounted them too because logistically it would take too much. You know, back then the only road we had, or highway we had, was Route 66. Of course, that went from Chicago to LA, as the song goes. And it was just a dirt road, a 2-lane road, went through a lot of little cities. And to carry this thing by truck, you know, you'd have to have a big security detachment. You'd have to stop for gas and water and food, and people would be curious. Additionally, you know, on the way you'd have to knock down trees, power lines, all kinds of stuff. And a train back then, the diesel electric locomotives were coming into fashion, so I figured, well, okay, they used a diesel locomotive because it could go all the way without refueling. But it would have the same problem. It'd have to knock down telephone poles and things like that, and it just logistically it wasn't possible. And as a side note, during the A-12 program, the predecessor to the SR-71, these airplanes were built in Burbank, California, and they were trucked out to Groom Lake in Nevada. And to do that, they took the outer wing panels off from the nose section, they boxed them up. And they put them in a box that was about 30 feet in diameter, put them on a flatbed, and trucked them out to Groom Lake. And from Burbank to Groom Lake, it took them 3 days. And it was horrendous for them because the telephone poles and electrical lines had to be disconnected and knocked down. And in one section of the road, the side of the road actually had to be dug away so the truck could make its way through there. So I came to the conclusion in this appendix that the thing didn't leave New Mexico. And one other point, you know, back then, atomic energy was in vogue. And as a matter of fact, I think General Twining, who was the head of the Army Air Forces back then, actually made a statement that said that he believed that these things were powered by atomic energy because of their high speeds and maneuverability. So I got to thinking, would it make sense for the government to take this thing with the idea that there's an atomic bomb on board and truck it all the way across the United States and plop it down at a major U.S. Air Force or Army Air Force base outside of a major city? What could possibly go wrong? So my conclusion in this appendix, and it was actually a white paper that I had wrote quite a few years ago, is that the thing never left New Mexico, and I identified where I think it was at. Now, I'm not going to tell you, you got to buy the book. Or if you go on the internet, you can, a French organization, a UFO organization that I belong to, actually posted this on the internet. So. And then appendix 2, this is the last thing I'm going to talk about, so you can wake up who's ever asleep beside you. Is just my idea of how UFO organizations and investigators need to rethink what they're doing. They need to conduct a better analysis of the craft and the occupants so we can get a better understanding of what's being seen. You know, like I said, nowadays we don't know anything right now that is any better than what we knew with the original flying saucer report. All we know is these things come here, people get out, they do something, and they take off. And to me, that's not good enough. We need to know more about the craft, like I said, about their manufacturing techniques, their manufacturing technologies. And one of the examples I gave you, these 2 rails on the side of the Ashland, Nebraska craft. It would have been interesting for the investigators to find out what did this look like? Did it have any fasteners? Did you see any nuts, bolts, screws, something like that? The craft itself, did you see any seams, any lines, anything that might have looked like a panel, so a landing gear, so we could better understand their technology. So with that, I'm going to take a nice long drink of water, and I'm going to end the presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. If you didn't enjoy it, please don't go out and get something from the buffet and start throwing it at me. Do we have time for questions?
Yes, questions and answers.
Any questions? I'm going to feel real bad if somebody does have a question. Okay. Thanks, because I'm old and I probably couldn't hear you.
I'm not sure if you covered it or not, but what's with the deal with, is it Area 51 in Nevada where they supposed to have an alien there and the spacecraft and things like that? Is that true? Do you believe in that?
Yeah, you know, Area 51 is a big area of that. And it's one of many areas that were identified by the Atomic Energy Commission so that atomic tests could take place. And Area 51 really didn't have any atomic bombs set off in them. And the reason we call Area 51 the Groom Lake, the dry lake bed out there, the reason it was selected is because when Kelly Johnson was developing the U-2, he needed a secret place to test these things. So actually Kelly Johnson and another guy got in a light airplane and they flew around and they saw this lake and they thought, hey, this is a good area. They landed, and it's nice and flat, it's huge, and it's surrounded by mountains, and it's an ideal place to test airplanes. So it became a testing place for secret airplanes. And then just south of it, there's another location, site S4, which is Papoose Lake. So secret airplanes are tested in this area. That's all I'm going to say. As a matter of fact, does anybody go to Las Vegas? Now, I know somebody goes to Las Vegas to gamble because I do. If you go to Las Vegas and you get to, I think it's Flamingo Road, and as you're going into town, if you make a right turn, you can go down Flamingo Road. They have the Atomic Testing Museum, and it's really fascinating. There's all kinds of stuff in there, all kinds of movies, all kinds of full-size mock-ups of atomic weapons, and it's free. So if you're ever in Nevada and you run out of money like I did, you can go to the Atomic Testing Museum and spend a lot of time in there. Yeah.
Hi, thanks very much for your talk. A couple of points. You mentioned that League of Planets sounded like a strange terminology, but at the time, the forerunner of the United Nations was the League of Nations. So it's just logical extension, I think.
Yeah, and that's a good point, but it just struck me as odd that the witness would use that. But maybe the alien actually understood our history and knew about this League of Nations. I think that came out of after World War I, didn't it?
Okay. And on the craft, on the vehicles being affected by some field or whatever, a diesel engine would not be affected, but a ignition engine, spark ignition engine would be affected.
Yeah, that's true. And through my research, it's unfortunate that because I didn't find anything associated with the diesel engine, and that's right, the diesel engines operate electrically on a different principle. And it's unfortunate that there are many of these reports where the engines were affected, and a lot of the reports, they don't talk about what the engine was. So they don't say it was a gasoline-powered engine or a diesel engine. So I use the gasoline-powered engine as the example.
Okay. Now we are getting so many cameras pointed at the sky. You know, a meteor explodes over Russia. Even Russia, there are heaps of videos of it. Any UFOs in the future will probably be multiply corroborated, and the metadata should be able to confirm that it's not doctored. So hopefully, if anything happens in the future.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a good thing about these cameras that are in cars, as an example, or cameras that are on buildings. If something like that happens, more than likely we'll be able to triangulate and find out exactly where this thing went. How fast it traveled, its arc across the sky, things like that. So that's a very good point. Okay.
Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. My question kind of follows Stuart's. Well, most of the things that you mentioned were back in the 60s and 70s. So with all the technology we have now, aren't there any more recent ones where you have been able to get more information about it?
Yeah, and that brings up a good point. I guess since maybe the late 80s, we've been going through this dark triangle phenomenon. I don't know if you're aware of that, but people have been, it started in Belgium actually, and people have reported these huge dark triangles that have been crossing the sky. And it could be we're going through another one of these events where this particular planet that decided that triangles were the best construction method to travel interstellarly are coming here. And I actually got to thinking about this. You know, I was a MUFON field investigator for a time, and I actually investigated a case of these dark triangles. And this one case kind of fascinated me because I talked to the witness, and he said we were on a Highway 5, which is a highway that runs basically the length of California. They were coming back from a hunting trip, and they were in a pickup. He was a passenger, and his buddy, the driver, had a heavy foot. He had a bunch of speeding tickets, and the passenger was concerned that the highway patrol was going to stop them, and they were going to get the ticket. They were going to be late to where they were going. It was late at night, so he kept telling the drivers to slow down. And he kept looking through the back window, and he noticed a set of bright lights behind him. He told the driver, slow down. There was a set of bright lights that might be the police. So the driver slowed down to below the speed limit. And as the passenger watched, he saw these lights coming towards him, and he noticed that they weren't on the road. He said they were suspended above the road, and below the road, the roadway was illuminated in this blue light. And as he traveled down the road, this object got nearer to them, and he said he could see in this bright light what looked like a dark chevron. And then on the outer edges were these two red lights. So he told the driver, he said, you better slow down and get off the road because I think there's an airplane that's going to land on the road. So they slowed down more, and they came to this over crossing that crosses the highway. And as they went under it, this craft went over it. And as they came out the other side, they looked, and on the side of the road, between the two roadways, the north and southbound lanes, this triangular object was just suspended in the sky, he said 75 or 100 feet in the air. So they were a little amazed at this. They pulled over and stopped and looked at this thing, and he thought it was an airplane or a blimp or something. So they both got out more towards it, and they got under it. And the witness said that he could see at the back end of this thing, there was this triangular lighted area. There was a yellow light coming from it, but he couldn't see anything inside. And then he said something that kind of amazed me. He said, I think the lights were coming from these four big canisters that were on the back of this craft. And I asked him, well, how were they connected to the craft? And he said, you know, this may sound funny, but it looked like they were connected to the craft by cheap scaffolding. And I was kind of amazed at that. And he said that this thing was just rock steady in the sky. It's like it was bolted to the sky. It didn't move at all. And the driver, his friend, got a little excited and scared because he realized something unusual. So we ran back to the truck, and then the driver, or the witness, decided, yeah, maybe I shouldn't be standing underneath this thing. So he went back to the truck and said they watched this thing, and it pivoted on its axis and then slowly took off in another direction. So we could be undergoing another one of these waves of sightings that I talked about. And these dark triangles might be part of this.
Thank you very much for your presentation, sir. Unfortunately, we've run out of time.
So-
I hope you can understand my Australian.
I can barely understand your Australian. A big round of applause for our speaker today. Don't take off like an open flying saucer. Come over here.
I wanted to get away before the food started.
No, they've eaten all that food. So come over here because we're going to present you with a plaque. Take a photo. Sarah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again.
And thank you all for listening.